I stood outside my own front door with two suitcases in my hands, and my daughter smiled through the window while I realized she had changed the locks. Before we begin, please take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Stories like this come from real-life family conflicts, and you won't want to miss what happened next. My name is Margaret Collins. I'm 68 years old, retired, and until that day I thought I knew exactly who my family was. I was wrong. The house stood in a quiet neighborhood outside Manchester. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Every brick, every flower bed, every scratch on the kitchen table carried a memory. Or at least I thought it was mine. 3 years earlier, after my husband David passed away, I found myself alone for the first time in over 40 years. The silence in the house felt unbearable. That's when my daughter Sophie suggested moving in. "Mom, you shouldn't be alone," she said. Her voice sounded caring. "I can help with groceries, appointments, everything." At the time, it seemed like a blessing. Sophie was 38, divorced, and raising her teenage son, Ethan. She said living together would help all of us. I agreed. For a while, everything felt perfect. We shared dinners. We watched television together. Ethan helped me in the garden. Sometimes I even felt grateful that life had given me another chance at family after losing David. But little things started changing. At first, Sophie insisted on handling the bills. "You're retired, Mom. Let me deal with the paperwork." Then she wanted access to my banking app. Then she started making decisions without asking. The curtains changed. The furniture moved. Family photos disappeared from shelves. Each time I mentioned it, she laughed. "It's just decorating." But it never felt like decorating. It felt like erasing. I ignored the feeling because I didn't want conflict. That was my first mistake. One evening, I came home from visiting an old friend and found strangers eating dinner in my dining room. I stood there confused. Sophie introduced them casually. "This is Claire and Mark." I waited for an explanation. None came. Later that night, I asked her what was going on. "Oh, they're staying a few weeks." "A few weeks?" "Just until they find somewhere else." I stared at her. She hadn't asked. She hadn't even told me. And somehow I was the one being treated like a guest. Still, I stayed quiet. Because that's what parents do, right? We make excuses for our children. Even when we shouldn't. Over the next few months, things became worse. Claire and Mark never left. More strangers started appearing. Friends of Sophie. People I didn't know. The house felt crowded all the time. The kitchen was never empty. The living room was always occupied. My home no longer felt like my home. One afternoon, I overheard Sophie talking on the phone. I wasn't trying to listen. I simply walked past the study and heard my address. Then I heard something else. "The property value has gone up a lot." Property value? The word stopped me cold. A few seconds later, she lowered her voice. I couldn't hear the rest. But something inside me felt uneasy. Very uneasy. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I searched through old documents. I wanted reassurance. I wanted proof that everything was fine. Instead, I found something that made my stomach twist. The deed. My name was still listed. But so was Sophie's. I remembered adding her years ago after David died. The solicitor had called it estate planning, a simple way to avoid future complications. At the time, it sounded sensible. Now it felt dangerous. For the first time, I wondered whether Sophie saw me as her mother. Or as an obstacle. I hated myself for thinking it. But once the thought appeared, it wouldn't leave. A week later, Sophie approached me with paperwork. "Mom, I just need your signature." I looked down. The document involved property ownership. My heart started pounding. What is this? It's nothing important. Nothing important. Whenever someone says that, it's usually very important. I read every page. The paperwork would transfer additional ownership rights to Sophie. Rights I wasn't willing to give away. I handed it back. "I'm not signing this." For a moment, her smile disappeared. It lasted less than a second. But I saw it. Cold. Sharp. Almost angry. Then the smile returned. "Of course, Mom, no pressure." But something had changed between us. Something I couldn't yet explain. 3 days later, I left for a weekend trip to visit my sister in York. I needed space. I needed time to think. I had no idea that when I returned, my entire life would be waiting on the other side of a locked door. And the person responsible would be my own daughter. What I discovered that evening would reveal a secret Sophie had been hiding for months. A secret that would eventually cost her far more than she ever imagined. And it all started with a key that no longer fit the lock. When my train pulled into the station that Sunday afternoon, I actually felt lighter. My weekend with my sister had helped. She noticed something was bothering me, but I didn't tell her everything. I wasn't ready to admit that I no longer trusted my own daughter. I took a taxi home. As we turned onto my street, something immediately felt wrong. My flower pots were gone. The wind chimes David had hung 20 years earlier had disappeared. Even the welcome mat was different. I told myself I was overthinking. Then I stepped onto the porch. My key wouldn't fit. I tried again. Nothing. I looked closer. The lock had been replaced. At first, I laughed nervously. There must be some mistake. I knocked. No answer. I knocked harder. A few seconds later, the curtain moved. Sophie looked directly at me. She wasn't surprised to see me. She was expecting me. She opened the door just enough to stand in the gap. Mom, what happened to the lock? We changed it. We? She crossed her arms. It was necessary. I stared at her. My clothes are inside. I packed 2 suitcases for you. She pushed them onto the porch. What's going on? I whispered. I think it's time you found somewhere else to live. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. I'm standing outside my own house. She sighed as if I were embarrassing her. You've been making everything difficult. I've been making things difficult? You refused to sign the papers. There it was. The truth. It had never been about helping me. It had been about the house. I tried to step inside. She blocked the doorway. You can't do this. I already did. Then she closed the door. I stood there in complete silence. The taxi driver quietly unloaded my second suitcase before driving away. Not one neighbor came outside. Not one person asked if I was okay. For the first time since David died, I felt completely alone. That night, I checked into a small hotel. I barely slept. I kept replaying everything. The dinners. The smiles. The hugs. Had any of it been real? Or had Sophie been waiting for the right moment all along? The next morning, I called the police. An officer listened carefully before asking a simple question. Is your name on the deed? Yes. And your daughter? Yes. He nodded. This isn't as simple as removing a trespasser. It's a civil property dispute. So you can't help? We can't force ownership decisions. I thanked him anyway. I wasn't angry at him. He was simply following the law. But one sentence stayed with me. Civil property dispute. That meant there was another path. A legal one. The following day, I met with a property solicitor named Emma Richardson. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked only one question. Who paid for the house? My husband and I. And when your daughter was added to the deed, did she contribute financially? No. Emma opened the land records. Then she smiled. Interesting. My heart skipped. What? Your daughter is listed as a co-owner. I know. But that's not the whole story. She turned the screen toward me. There are restrictions attached to the ownership. I frowned. I don't understand. When the deed was updated years ago, your solicitor included protective clauses. I blinked. I don't remember that. Most people don't. She pointed to a paragraph. Major decisions involving the property require both owners to agree. I stared at the document. So she can't sell it? No. She can't refinance it? No. She can't legally remove you from possession either. For the first time in days, I smiled, very slightly. Emma leaned back. And if she's pretending otherwise, she's taking a very serious legal risk. Over the next week, Emma advised me not to confront Sophie again. Let her keep making mistakes. That sounded strange. What do you mean? If she believes she's already won, she'll become careless. She was right. Without contacting Sophie directly, Emma began gathering evidence. Utility bills, council tax records, property documents, insurance policies. Everything still listed me as the primary owner. Meanwhile, I discovered something even stranger. A neighbor I had known for years called me privately. Margaret. Yes? I didn't know how to tell you this. What is it? I've seen estate agents visiting your house. I froze. What? 3 different times. My stomach tightened. Estate agents? She was trying to sell the house. Without me. Suddenly everything made sense. The strangers living there. The renovations. The paperwork she wanted me to sign. She wasn't building a home. She was preparing an investment. And I was the obstacle standing in the way. Emma immediately contacted the estate agency. Within hours, they confirmed that someone claiming to be the sole decision-maker had requested a valuation. When they learned another legal owner had never approved the process, they canceled everything. The agent sounded shocked. If we'd known both owners hadn't consented, we would never have proceeded. Emma thanked them. Then she looked at me. This is becoming much bigger than changing locks. I nodded slowly. I know. No, she replied quietly. I don't think you do. She slid another document across the table. It wasn't about selling the house. It was about something else. Something far more serious. Someone had recently applied for financing using the property's value as security. The application hadn't been approved, but the signatures attached to the paperwork made my blood run cold. Because one of them looked almost exactly like mine. And in that moment, I realized my daughter hadn't just betrayed my trust. She may have committed a crime that could change both of our lives forever. I picked up the document with shaking hands. At first glance, it looked like my signature. The same looping M, the same long line under my last name. But it wasn't mine. I knew every stroke of my own handwriting. Someone had practiced it. Someone had copied it. Emma didn't say anything for a moment. She let me study the page. Finally, she asked, "Did you sign this?" I looked her straight in the eyes. No. She nodded once. I thought so. That single word changed everything. This was no longer just a family disagreement. This was a legal matter. Emma immediately contacted the lender, informed them that the signature was being disputed, and requested that the application be frozen while they investigated. Within 2 days, I received a call from their fraud department. They wanted handwriting samples, bank records, identification documents. I provided everything they asked for. The investigator thanked me before saying something I will never forget. "Mrs. Collins, if this signature is confirmed to be forged, there will be serious consequences." I hung up the phone and sat in silence. I didn't want my daughter arrested. Despite everything, she was still my child. But I also knew I couldn't protect her from the consequences of her own choices. A week later, Emma filed an application with the court. She requested immediate access to the property and asked the judge to order Sophie to stop representing herself as the sole decision-maker. The hearing was scheduled quickly. On the morning of the hearing, I saw Sophie for the first time since she had locked me out. She avoided looking at me. Her confidence from that day on the porch was gone. When the judge entered, both sides presented their evidence. Sophie's lawyer argued that they had simply had family disagreements. Emma calmly placed the documents before the court. The original deed, the ownership restrictions, the photographs of the changed locks, the estate agency emails, the financing application. One piece at a time, the story became impossible to ignore. Then came the question that changed the room. The judge looked directly at Sophie. "Did you change the locks without the agreement of the other legal owner?" She hesitated. "Yes." "Were you aware that Mrs. Collins remained a legal owner of the property?" Another pause. "Yes." The courtroom became completely silent. The judge wrote a few notes before speaking again. "You cannot remove a co-owner from their own property by changing the locks." There was no anger in his voice, only certainty. An order was issued requiring Sophie to restore my access immediately. She also had to cover my legal costs for the proceedings. But that wasn't the end. The lender's fraud investigation continued separately. Several weeks later, they confirmed what I already knew. The signature on the financing application had not been written by me. The application had been submitted using false authorization. Because the loan had never been approved, no money had been released. Still, making a false application carried serious legal consequences. Rather than face a lengthy criminal case, Sophie accepted responsibility through her solicitor, cooperated fully with the investigation, and entered into a legal resolution that included financial penalties, mandatory repayment of costs, and a formal record of the misconduct. It wasn't the ending I had imagined for my daughter, but it was the ending her decisions created. A month later, I walked back through my own front door. Everything looked different. The furniture had been moved. The walls had been repainted. Many of David's old photographs were stored in boxes. I spent days putting them back where they belonged. Every picture felt like bringing part of my life home. Ethan came to see me a few weeks later. He stood awkwardly on the porch. "I'm sorry, Grandma." I hugged him before he could say anything else. "This wasn't your fault." Tears filled his eyes. "I told Mom this was wrong." "I know." He visited every Sunday after that. Slowly, we rebuilt our relationship. Not everything that breaks has to stay broken. As for Sophie, we didn't speak for almost a year. Then one afternoon, I received a handwritten letter. Not a text. Not an email. A real letter. She admitted she had convinced herself that the house was already hers. She said greed had slowly replaced gratitude. She apologized for treating me like an obstacle instead of a mother. I cried while reading it. Forgiveness didn't happen overnight. Trust certainly didn't. But I replied. We started with short conversations, then occasional coffee meetings. We never pretended the past hadn't happened. Instead, we learned to speak honestly for the first time in years. People often ask if I felt victorious. The truth is, watching your own child make terrible choices never feels like winning. What gave me peace wasn't revenge. It was justice. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten. I didn't break the law. I simply trusted the truth, gathered the evidence, and let the legal system do its job. The locks on my door were changed again. This time, I held every key. Not because I wanted power, but because I had finally learned that kindness should never require surrendering your dignity. If this story touched you, let me know in the comments. What would you have done if your own child locked you out of your home?